June 17th, 1982. This is Stella Wallace and Karen Doyle. We'll be interviewing John Doran at his home in Hermitage.
Anglicized them, made them English, and like there's a chap down in Panett, came from Boston, McGagan, I think, but it's still the Gaelic name, Mcgeoaghan, something like that. And but most of the names have been changed to suit now there's German people over here, and their name is Pirch or something like that, but it's spelled P-I-R-C-H, so everyone here calls them Perch. Yeah, and that's what it is, but see, it's not at all.
Yeah.
It's not the way they pronounce it. They mind that, but there's nothing they can do, see. And now another generation or so, and it'll be just Perch, and no one will ever know that it was pronounced. I'm not German, so I can't pronounce it quite the way, but it's quite different than Perch. Yeah. But the downfall of the Irish people, when they didn't have a written language and they spoke Gaelic, Gaelic is perhaps the hardest language in the world to learn. And so if a tribe or a clan, then when they went to Scotland they called them clans. In Ireland there were tribes, so they decided to raid someone or start a little war or something, and they spoke Gaelic and they would say an English garrison. Well, they didn't know what was going on. But once everybody started speaking English, they were beat. Because even to this day, when they're fighting over there, they talk too much, and including myself, because they didn't have a written language and they liked to talk and they told stories and everything was handed down. And if you were talking in, we'll call it a foreign language, where they couldn't understand you, it was pretty nearly code. But once you started speaking everybody else's language, you had to be a little bit more careful, but they never were. And that's to this day why they're losing over there in their little war they have with England. Because they always can find out what they're going to do next. And another thing was when they decided to do something, say they were going to have an uprising, well, it'd have to be on an Easter Sunday or a St. Patrick's Day, or just little idiosyncrasies. Like, and then when you're fighting someone like the English, like they beat the Germans with the same thing. They knew the Germans were very methodical, and they'd follow a thing right out, and then they'd make a slip up, and they zoned in on that. See? Like the Germans were winning the war, and then they decided to go against Russia. If they had read their history books, they'd see where Napoleon did that and lost, and they lost the same way. So the English just watched all that. Same with Argentina. They sent the Gurkhas down, and the Gurkhas are from Nepal or somewhere like that. I can't know if I have the right pronunciation, but they're the fellas that say there's three guys in the trench, and it's in the nighttime. You wake up in the morning, and each fellow on each side he's got his throat cut. You never heard a thing. One of these fellows crawled in the night with a great big knife in his mouth. And so a few stories like that, and these were only 18-year-old boys, huh? And like they kept their army home in case England had decided when they finished there to go over to Argentina. They didn't have any chance, but they gave them quite a go, England, with their air force. You see, I guess it'd be German trained. All the Germans left when the Second World War, and they escaped to Argentina, and so they did pretty well with their air force. Cost England a lot of money. I was on Argentina's side because I don't like England, and I have English friends, but we argue about it all the time. Like they've been too mean over the years. Like even letting those fellows die in the cells, starve to death. Like those guys weren't right. Like what they were doing, it wasn't the right way. But just the same, it takes a pretty brave man to starve himself to death for a cause, you see. An Englishman couldn't understand that. He couldn't understand, like they can't, like I have friends that are English and they work for people and they can't understand why I think so much of my land and my farm. You see what I mean? It don't mean it, like they consider like Clive Pickles down there in Pownell, he's upper class, see. And they kind of kowtow to him or bow down to him. And I tell them the story about the Irishman down in Texas, and he had a ranch, and this Englishman walked in and asked him where his master was, and he said, the son of a bee hasn't been born yet. You see, and so that's why that's a different mentality, and they live two-handed together. So it was unfortunate. So what questions now? I mightn't be able to tell you very much. I might be able to give you some names that you could go to, whether they'd be able to tell you anything or not. You know, for your you tell me what you'd like to know.
Well, you've done some work on this. Have you done research on it? On the Irish on the island?
I don't know if I'm interested in it, and I've read a lot about it and everything, but it's not, I still don't know if I know anything about it. Like, it's one of my hobbies, huh? But I still mightn't be able to give you any information. You may find someone that could give you 10 times as much. Like, I've gone right back, see, right back to, like there's one theory that the Irish are the lost tribe of Israel. Like, it has never been found, you see, and they don't know where the Irish came from. Now, they weren't Irish. They're not Irish. They're the Celts. You see, the Gaelic language, the C is a K. You see, it's Celtic, but it's Celtic. It's pronounced Celtic, and like Eamon is Edward. You see, and it begins with an A. You know, and it's a hard language. I'd love to. If I had known, I would have tried to learn it, because there was. In fact, there's still some people that can speak it. Like this, I know. Oh yeah, Alan Cameron was he's Scotch, but the Gaelic is the same. See, they came from Egypt, India, somewhere like that. They never formed a nation, but they came across, and when they got to Ireland, there was some, we'll call it there was people there. Firbolgs, however you pronounce it. They were more like cavemen. They conquered them, I don't think, and they're the ones that they call the leprechauns. They're the ones that are supposed to have gone underground. And they left, some of them left Ireland and went over to Scotland. And when they raided Scotland and conquered it, they were called Scots. But they had left Ireland, but they were still the Celtic people. And there was different branches of them, like the Picts and the Scots, and there was different, not tribes, but there was different branches, but they were all the same race. And then, like the first Britons, that was them. And in England today, I think it's in Cornwall, there's still Celtic people. And Brittany in France, like that's what Cape Breton is named after, you see, that part of France. And even a place, they invaded Turkey, and even there's one place in Turkey where you'll see blue-eyed people, you see. There's still some Celtic blood in them. And but like I say, they never formed a nation. And then when the Romans, they were one of the few, I don't know if there was any until Rome fell, but when Rome was in its glory, they sacked Rome. They invaded Rome and sacked it. Like, you know, took everything, and like they were pagans, and they were the Irish is a warrior race. Now the Germans are a military race, and the English. Everybody stand in line, march, follow the fellow ahead of you. You know what I mean? That's how the Americans beat them. And they don't fire till you see the whites of their eyes at Bunker Hill and those places, and they just mowed them down. Even that song about the British are running, the Battle of 1812 or New Orleans or something, the squirrel guns, well, that's true. That's how they worked it, because they just kept their military people. The Irish were warriors, and they Elizabeth, Miss Doyle, and Miss Wallace.
How do you stand?
Okay. And they... when St. Patrick converted them, they lost quite a bit of that. Like, after all, they were Christians then, but their church was the Celtic church. And if you go to some of the graveyards now, in Vernon River, I believe there's still the Celtic cross. Now, have you ever seen them?
The circle around it?
Yeah, circle around it. That's the Celtic cross. And then I think it was King James of Scotland married Margaret, and she was from Sweden, I believe, and she liked the Roman Church, you see. And the only difference between the Roman Catholic Church and the Celtic Catholic Church was the day that Easter fell on. And she brought in the Roman monks. The people all spoke Gaelic. they changed the language of the court and business to Latin, and that left everybody illiterate. See, they were Gaelic people. Huh? Same as they're doing with the metric now. Even more so, though, because like without any education, like you spoke the Gaelic and you were fluent in it, they had their Brehon laws in the Dorans long ago. That was 15th, 16th century. They were well, I don't you call it say ombudsmen or lawyers or whatever. They decided the disputes. They settled them, and they got 1/12 of the amount of money.
They made themselves.
Yeah, I guess so. But there was the Brehon law. I don't know if that's the right pronunciation or not because it's a Gaelic word. And they had their own law. And women had property rights, and women women could lead the certain tribe, that sort of thing. So they had it's different than the English law. You see. The English law was against women. And yeah, like the Irish have a mother complex, and the Germans have a father complex. That's why Germans don't make good husbands. You can remember that. The worst husbands in the world, the Germans. Hope you.
The Irish today.
The Irish, no. Ireland is pictured as an old woman with her 4 green fields. Have you ever heard the song, The 4 Green Fields? Have you ever heard it? Yeah. I mean, you get a bunch of Irishmen in a pub, and you get someone that can sing, and they sing that song. They're ready to go right over to England and take it over. See, there's not enough of them, especially since the famine. Huh?
Well, the English have the father complex too.
Yeah, they have the father complex too, because there's a lot of German in the English. They got into a little corner one time, the Angles and the Saxons, a little corner of England, and the Irish were so busy fighting or the Celts were so busy fighting the Danes and the Norwegians that these fellas got a chance and took over, see, and drove them out. But the church then, the Roman monks came, and they burnt the Celtic churches and destroyed the Celtic churches because Easter, they said that was a heresy. The Celts had it, the Celtic church, that Easter could fall like on a different date. No, wait now. Or was it the same date each year? And what our Easter now can be on a different date. That was the difference. They had a certain day that it fell on. And but before St. Patrick converted them, like they had the Druids, and they practiced witchcraft, and they used to go out before the armies. They lead the armies and put a curse on the other armies. They had white beards and robes, something like Merlin. See, King Arthur was Celtic. King Arthur in the Round Table, like whether it's myth or legend or whether there really was, that was they were Celtic knights. They weren't English. Now, I saw a thing on television not very long ago, Walt Disney or something. They pictured them as English, but they owned England then. They were the Britons. See, they were English as we know them. Weren't even there then. So they destroyed the Celtic Church, and the Roman Catholic Church took over. But the Druids, when they drove the Druids out, they believed that the oaks were sacred, and they had the groves of oaks. And one of the things they did was cut down their groves of oaks. They believed in immortality, the same as we do, and they never had a great deal of luck since they did it. When you come to think of it, see, the Druids put them stones up so they could tell when Christmas and Easter was at Stonehenge, and you perhaps heard tell them the great big rocks. They don't know how they got them up. There'd be a flat one on the top, and when the sun comes up, they could tell, like when it hit a certain line at a certain time, they knew when Easter was and Christmas was, and so on, different special days. Like they had the Druids had the mistletoe, see, but they practiced witchcraft, and they controlled the country.
Well, they weren't considered Christians.
No, they considered them pagans.
Pagans.
Yeah, but then, like I say, then the
St.
Irish.
Patrick had to,
He drove them up.
Yeah.
It got overpowered. And they, so then you had the Roman Catholic Church, and King Henry You people perhaps know more about this than me.
No.
King Henry, King Henry of England. Anyway, it was the only English pope. Now, whether he was Henry and the king was some other name, but anyway, it was an English pope, and there hasn't been an English pope since him, and he sent someone over to conquer Ireland and pay him a cent a head, like for all the ones that he conquered, not killed, but conquered. And because he considered them heathens, and they had more religion and more Christianity than they had. So they got a bad deal from the English, and they also got a bad deal from the church. You see, not just then, right down through. So, when the famine came, that's when. Now, the Dorans came here in 1830. They came up around New Waterford, up your way. They settled up there, and then they moved down. Our branch, moved down. So I guess we're perhaps related to those people up there, but I've never met them. I went by once, and I was going up to buy a Hereford bull from a Ramsey boat, and it was raining hard, and I saw the names. It was a detour. And we went through Foxley River, and I saw them. I would have liked to have met the old man. Archie was his name. I remember he got caught for driving without a license, I think, or speeding or some damn thing. And God, he was perhaps 89 or something then, you know. I forget what he said in court, but it was funny. The Irish have a sense of humor, most of them, you know. The Scotch were a little dour. Now, the Wallaces are not Highland Scotch. No. They're not Celtic. No, you see, they're more closer to the English. But they're not English. They're not they haven't got the Saxon in them. Mm. They might have the that's something I have to delve into. Just what are they made up of? You see, because they hated the English. Wallace led them, in the poem, William Wallace, and Edward, was it Edward the Bruce, or those names? They rebelled against England way back, and there was the Battle of Bannockburn and all that sort of thing. So they're not the same makeup as the English, but they're not Highland Scotch. They were the Celtic people. They got driven up into the Highlands by the Romans and then by the British. Fort Augustus back here to the north of us is mostly Irish people. Mm. But Fort Augustus was a place in Scotland, a fort that the English built to try to keep the Highlanders under control before the Battle of Culloden and Bonnie Prince Charlie and all that. There was Irish went to that battle, 150, and the Scotch broke and ran, and the Irish stood their ground, but they got wiped out. The reason they lost that battle was because something like Argentina. There was nothing at that time would stand Highland charge. There was no nation. When they got those claymores and those kilts and bagpipes and they rolled down over the thing, everything went before them. They were terrifying, you see. Mm. And they were fierce people. And the English had the grape shot then and the cannons. Old nails and bolts and whatever, and junks iron, and when it'd just mow them down, and then they had bayonets. These were all new technology, you see, and they couldn't get in close enough. The bayonet was, until this day, the bayonet on the end of the rifle is pretty, if you've got a line of soldiers in there, how are you going to strike them with a sword, if you were using the sword, because this is, so that's how they finally lost. They would have won, and history would have been different. And then Bonnie Prince Charlie had a bad advisor, Lord Murray. He was a bad advisor. So, but that's, of course, that's the way things are supposed to be, I guess. But for 7,500 years, that's a long time in history. That's how far back the Scotch and Irish and Celtic people go. And their day of glory is way back. The Germans was in 1940-45. That's when and the Romans was at another time, and the Greeks at another time, and the Americans are right now, but it's starting. Vietnam was downhill, and so on. And England's is pretty well, Argentina, is only a little they never had a war with anybody really or anything, and well, with a little more effort, they probably could have beat them. In fact, it was looking so bad, Reagan was ready to go back on their side again. So our people came in 1830, and then the famine, I guess, was what, 1840?
Yeah.
And there was the Monaghan settlers came then. There was, I think, 600 came at one time, and that's where your people in Fort Augustus and your people, I think, in Kincora and the people in Iona, they came from County Monaghan. It's right up near Northern Ireland. Now, like there's a Dromore in back here, between here and Fort Augustus, and an Auburn, and those are names right on the map in Ireland, right up at close to Northern Ireland. And see, the Irish people were driven out of Northern Ireland. That was the richest province. Like that's the fourth green field. See, that's the fourth. And they drove them out, and they settled it with English and Scotch settlers. Now they call themselves Irish. See, they were put in on other people's land, the same as we were all moved off our farms here and drove right over to Nova Scotia or somewhere. See, the English did the same with them as they did with the Acadians. And then they put these settlers in there. They stocked it with them, and they were all Protestant people, and they were like English and Scotch. And now there's no way you can get. I don't know if you'd ever get them to agree, because they've taken it from them, other people. They've taken it from them. It belongs to the Irish, same as we've taken it from, say, the Micmacs. So that's why the trouble is there. And then England wouldn't help them very much in the famine. And the Quakers would help them if they would, and some of the other religions, the Anglicans, if they would join their church. And most of the Irish would die first, see, because they were Roman Catholics, and that was their faith, and they starved to death rather than do that. Like I know one name on the island here that are Anglicans, and that's if you trace it back, and they've had good positions ever since too. If you trace it back, that's what they did. But I don't know what I would have done. I like to eat too. perhaps to be but I mean the majority of them, like perhaps 99%, wouldn't do this. I shouldn't say that about the Quakers. I think the Quakers were the only ones that perhaps really tried to help them without any strings attached. It was the Anglicans and some of the other religions. And then it was in Scotland, like when they lost their Celtic church, they didn't take it quite the same as the Irish. And then when the churches when the church had there was human beings run the church, and there was things they didn't like, and John Knox and Calvin and those people got going, they became Presbyterians, and very strong that way, just like the other ones were strong Roman Catholics. And so that presented a problem too, even when the Pope was there now. Paisley was getting them to fire tomatoes or oranges and this sort of thing. They fired stones at a bus and they hurt some children. But that isn't to say the other side doesn't do that too. But it's not really religion, is it? No. But it's not religion and it's not politics, but it's been their downfall. And if I think if they read their history, they'd see that the church wasn't all that much help to them either. They'd perhaps be better if they tried to figure the thing out. There might be another way around it. Like even that money they're sending over from the States to Northern Ireland now for them to buy guns with, there might be a better way to use that. It might be better to either emigrate or move into the Republic, set up something there, industry, whatever, and leave those other fellows there, because you're never going to change their mind. Mm-hmm. And if you live by the sword, you'll perish by the sword. Like when Mountbatten got blew up, it was Irishmen that did it. But he was the fellow that put the Canadians on the beaches and had them all slaughtered in the Second World War, you see, just because he thought it might work. He figured if he got 10,000 men killed, he might take 2 miles of German territory. if you got 15,000 men killed, he might even capture the place. And even in this war with Argentina, they used Welsh and Scots, plus these Gurkhas. They probably got them for 50 cents a day. So like these fellows here, these friends of mine, like they're all army age, and they weren't there fighting it out. And even in Northern Ireland, they sent see, they know their history. They sent Scotch soldiers in with their little what do you call them, tams or something that they wear. Well, see, that's a Celt against a Celt. See, but my mother-in-law is Scotch, and she don't think she's any relation to the Irish at all. But she is. When they went to Scotland and they got their clans, they got a little more pride. You know, they got a little out of hand, and they looked down on the Irish then. See, they weren't as well organized, and then they were taking more of a beating, and then they had the famine. But then they found the ones that put them out in the clearances, when the Highlanders had to leave Scotland, like Lord Selkirk brought some to Prince Edward Island here and out to west. It was their own people that put them out. It wasn't the English. Like the Lord or the Laird owned, say, 5,000 acres, and all these people that were on, these people in the clan were on that land, and the English came to them and said, "We'll rent it from you for like they were paying rent. They were croppers. That's what they call them. They were paying rent, and they said, "We'll pay you 3 times as much. We want to pasture it with sheep." So he rented it to the English to pasture, and they all had to leave. And like a lot of the Scotch people think it was the English that put them up, but only indirectly. The Fraser, he looked after his clan, and then of course Lord Selkirk. Lord Selkirk was going to bring Irish people to the island. That was his. No, he didn't. But that was his intention. But I think some Irish came with them. Yeah. But that was his intention. But you see, this Prince Edward Island was to be a Protestant settlement. There was no Catholics allowed. And Catholics couldn't vote here, I guess it's over 100 years ago now. It's not that much over.
No.
We couldn't vote. And weren't allowed to, see. And then when the Belfast riot came, like my ancestors were at it, they came from, they came from they won that, because I looked up even the sheriff's record, and they won that. Now I'm not saying that it was I didn't think it was a good idea, but they won.
Irish won, was it?
It was the Irish that won, but to this day they'll tell you down there that the Scotch did, and they tell you that the Irish buried their dead in the woods and everything. No way. Everybody came home. Some with sore heads. I'm not saying that to be like, if it was the other way around, I'd say it too, but like I've talked to some of the old people too, and they said they all came home. There's nobody in there. And the Catholics bury their dead in the graveyard, in the consecrated ground. They didn't leave them in the woods down Belfast. But they killed 3 or 4 Scotchmen, and they were taken to court. But none of the Scotchmen were taken to court. It was just the Irish. And they were some of them were like punished for it, you see. But none of the Scotch were ever taken up. There was a chaplain down there to the Belfast Historical Society a few years ago and explained that to them. I thought he was a brave man. They all sat there. I would have liked to be there to see their faces. And he didn't do it for any reason. He was just telling them facts, you see. But it was nothing to be proud of. But the election was rigged, see. It didn't matter how it was open election. You had to tell who you voted for. And they had it made up. Like they had it made up. They knew that this was going to take place. That the election was canceled, and the other side, the ones that they didn't want, the Irish didn't want elected, were put in.
It was on religious grounds.
It was on religion, yeah. On the one hand, you had your Scotch Presbyterians, and on the other hand, you had your Roman Catholic Irish, and then you had politics also. And to this day, it's pretty nearly still that way. You know, it's like there's only been one Catholic that has run for member in this district, I guess ever. That was Vernon, the late Vernon McIntyre. He ran for the Conservatives and was elected. You see, the Liberals have never. And in the legislature, it's 22-11, something like that. That's the proportion.
Was there a lot of bad feeling between the Irish and the Scottish right here on the island?
Yes, yeah. Not everywhere,
No.
but in this area, on account of this Belfast riot. Like it's still, if you go down through there and ask them questions about the Belfast riot, you won't get answers. They won't want to talk about it.
Well, it's just really the last 10 years that they started to work together, associate with one another, really.
Yeah, and then even that's only
Through the Lions Club and some of that is only...
Yeah, that's changed it somewhat.
Some of that is only, you know, not all true, perhaps on the other side for our... When we went to school, everybody was designated, you know. It was, you could even, like, it was a mixed school. Say, up here now wasn't, but down in Vernon it was. And they played and everything, but, you know, they're Protestant sort of thing, you know. Even back, you know, that's not that long.
Well, then you had your Orange Lodge, like it started in Ireland, and it came over here. There was one just down in Millview. And their pledge is to wade in the Catholics' blood. That's one of their oaths. And now I don't know what the Knights of Columbus say. Perhaps they say something worse. But this was the Orange Lodge. Like your child couldn't, if you were an Orangeman, your child couldn't go to a school where there was a Catholic teacher unless there was no. I saw the book. I read the book with this in it. And I worked at a place when I was starting to farm. Before I started to farm, I worked at a place where the Canada Packers had a big poultry setup, and I managed it. And the guy that had looked after it was an Orangeman, and him and I were, you know, I'd go in and talk to him. Like he lived in the yard, you know. I'd talk to him, and I'd eat my lunch there. And I went in one day to eat my lunch, and all these booklets were there. And I glanced at one of them, and this is one of the things it said. Like, if there was no other way, you could let the child go to school, but you had to make sure if there was any other. And if you were doing business, if there was anyone else you could do business with, in other words, keep them down. The Protestant ascendancy, they had to be. And so that didn't help the Irish. Like, and then, like they more or less had to keep a lot of things. There was a lot of things they couldn't say because they weren't allowed to vote. And even when they did get to vote, like then they had the Belfast riot, and the Irish were taken up for it, and the other ones weren't. The other ones, the other side, we'll call it, had more power. They had, like to this day, they have 22 members to our 11, and they had more judges, more policemen, more lawyers, and to this day, it's still like that. And when there is a judge, say, or something gets through politics, and then he gets to be a judge and he's a Catholic, it's pretty, not always, but quite often he's in their pocket. Like he knows that's how he got it, so he leans over for them. Now, I mean, I'm not saying like this. This is just facts. Like, you know, if it was the other way around, perhaps it'd be the same thing. They were here first, and you know, and they have a system. Like they have a. It's like from England. Now they have it. Like the piece of pie is only so big, and they want the biggest slice. But then when the population got 50-50 on the island, well, then a lot of it was kept undercover, and everybody tried to make believe everything was hunky-dory. It's not quite that way. Like even when this new hospital opened, in the paper you'd see funny statements made, you know, about the orange and the green and all this sort of thing. Perhaps you've read some of it or noticed it. And it works both ways. It's as bad for one side to be doing that as the other. Like it's not Christianity. It's not, you know, but it kept them. it kept a lot of people from getting jobs or like at one time in Ontario, unless you were in the Orange Lodge, you couldn't even get to be a sweep the street. See, so and it was unfortunate. You know, it's the English that started the Orange Lodge. It's just like when they started the Ku Klux Klan in the States. Have you ever heard tell of the Ku Klux Klan? Yeah. Well, the Negroes were freed, and 2 or 3 fellows got together and they thought up this idea. And the white sheets, of course, would scare the black people. And then, of course, they were against the Catholics and against the Jews and whatever. They were, a lot of them were Methodists and Southern Baptists. And anyway, this was the Ku Klux Klan, and it still goes to this day. I lived in Boston until I was 12. And a friend of mine, his stepfather was in the Ku Klux Klan. But it's now I'm not comparing the Orange Lodge with the Ku Klux Klan, but they have some things in common. Any kind of a secret society, like I won't join the Knights of Columbus because you're supposed to be your brother's keeper, and if you're in there and with the idea that they're going to help each other, and they're not going to help someone else. Like I have a friend that's a Baptist, and he built a barn for me here. And I have other friends that are brethren, and I have friends that have no religion at all, and everything. But I don't think anyone should try to keep anybody else down, you know, and use religion or politics for it. Like if someone has a daughter and she gets through to be a registered nurse, well, someone else's daughter, like let's say, came bottom of the class and that one came top. If they can squeeze the top one out and she has to leave, well, we all lose there. The poorer one gets the job, or even to the snowplow operator. We're stuck on a snowbank. I guess up your way last winter was pretty bad because the guy was the guy that was a liberal was a good snowplow operator, and he lost his job, or vice versa. So I don't believe in that. But it has affected. It's still affecting it in Ireland, and it still affects it here. There's still a problem. If you're Irish, you don't have quite as good a chance if you're Irish and if you're Catholic in a lot of cases of getting certain things or certain positions or getting into politics, as well as if you were, in other words, if you were a United Church, Orange Lodge or Mason or something, you'd have a lot better chance. So
one thing there, John, is when the Irish came, they had to take the inland.
That was because the other people were ahead of them.
That's ridiculous. But they pushed them too. They didn't let them have the waterfronts, eh? And the richest land, like they ended up in Fort Augustus, which, well, I guess people Fort Augustus.
Well, Dromore now. Dromore was poor land, yeah.
And Kellish Cross. And that in itself kept them poorer than English Protestants would say that were on the
say in Winslow. Nice, level, rich land, see, handy to city.
So that's
one
kind of
example.
Important, yeah.
Yeah.
Because that there in itself would give.
But she can't print this. Like I'm just telling her.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. See, we'd start another bell.
But that is I mean, that's a fact where you'll find them. That's all right.
Yeah.
That's a fact where you'll find them in the.
There was an
Iona.
Yeah. They had the
you
hill.
get your poor land.
Well,
of course, they made it poor.
Yeah, it eroded on them. Yeah, they grew grain for the horses in the Civil War. The United States was a big demand for oats for the horses, and they exported it into England too. And I suppose it went to England, and then they sold it to the States and made a profit. And year after year, in oats with no fertilizer, and the land, a lot of it went down into the. Now down below here in Vernon Rivers, you could bring your step across it in places, but there was ships built there and sailed out. See, it's all silted in. So it's the same in Iona. They cropped it out and it eroded and so on. Now it's good tobacco land. Now I'm not saying all of it. There's still farms there that are good and everything, but that was against them. Like, see, there was no fertilizer. There was in a lighter vein. There was an Irishman back in Fort Augustus, and a neighbor stole one of his sheep was a lot of, now this chap lived in Drumore, but he was Fort Augustus Parish, like that's the church he went to, which would be 6 miles or so, I guess, and horse and wagons those days. And they had a certain day a week or every 2 weeks that pretty well everyone went down to the church in the afternoon to confession. And he suspected so-and-so for stealing the sheep. He had a pretty good idea it was him. Like, you know, there's a lot of houses in the community then, and I suppose that, like anywhere else, there'd be a rascal, you know. So he got down to the church about an hour ahead of all the neighbors, and he went to the priest. This is a true story. He went to the priest and told him that someone was dying at an awful distance. The priest hitched up his horse and wagon and away he went. So this chap, Mick was his name, got into the confessional. And the first confession he heard was a couple that were going to get married. Now, I don't know what took place there. But he knew what to say. See, you can't see. I don't know if either one of you are Catholics, but you can't see in the confession, like, you know, it's dark in there, and they just asked for their penance. And he, of course, had gone to confession all his life. He knew what to say 2 or 3 Our Fathers or 2 or 3 Hail Marys, and don't do it again, sort of thing. And they wouldn't notice. But I don't know what went on there, but he never told that part. Anyway, eventually, along come the chap, and he didn't tell about stealing the sheep. And he was pretty nearly ready to leave, and he said, well, I'll call him Jack. Jack, is there anything else you want to tell me? Is there anything now that you might have forgotten? Okay, so, yes, he said, Father, he says, I stole Mick's sheep. So there wasn't any sound. See, he had only had a suspicion, now he was sure. He says, what's my penance, Father? He says, I'm going to cut your goddamn throat. So there was some funny things done in those days. That'd be a hard penance. I imagine he got a thumping. It wouldn't be right there, but this fellow was quite a fighter. They used to do a lot of fighting. They used to be like John L. Sullivan way back he was a champion, but they fought with their bare knuckles, with their fists, no boxing gloves. When boxing gloves come in, they weren't quite, you know, well, like Sharkey, I don't know if it's Irish or not. There was Jack Dempsey, I'm not sure what that name, but the gloves pretty nearly, like when they fought here at the picnics and the tea parties and all that, they fought with their bare fists, and it's pretty severe. I had an uncle on my mother's side, and he hit a horse and killed him with his fist. And the horse balked, and he had a few drinks in. And he got out, and the air, I suppose, was blue, and he hauled off and hit the horse, and the horse dropped in the shafts. And I never was very proud of that. And we were down here in the building, Elizabeth was with me one year, not so many years ago, and we had a bunch of Holstein steers. Like, they'd be about 500 or 600 pound year-old steers. And we were inoculating them for a thing called blackleg that they'll take unless they get the inoculation. One of them stepped on my foot and I hauled off and hit him and killed him. He dropped right there. And I turned around and Elizabeth said, you killed him? I said, I don't give a damn. An Irishman, you know, and his little ladder and that, looked around. There wasn't anything I could do. He was gone. So we had to call the dead stock and they winched him out. But up until then, I used to wonder, like even at the story, like if the story about my Uncle Joe was right. But he went up to Boston, and I remember I was, 12, I was 11, I guess, it was a year before we left. And there was a lot of taverns in Boston. And one of the curses the Irish have is the liquor, and it's something I never did. I've never drank. The Dorans could do that, but my mother's people couldn't. And there was this tavern, and the thing started to boil over, and there was a window broke, and out the door come Joe and these 2 or 3 other fellas, and he was hammering away at them. He's about 6'6". And the paddy wagon came along in the squad car, and the cops jumped out. And by then you had these other poor fellas stretched out, and there was 2 policemen in each vehicle, and he had 3 of them down and out, And the fourth was a big Irish cop. He hit him over the head with the billy club 2 or 3 times. And then they dragged him in. The cops got up to their feet, and they dragged him in, put him in the paddy wagon. I wouldn't tell. These 2 friends were even, God, I wouldn't tell. We went to the Cathedral of the Holy Cross School. There was no way I was going to say, that's my uncle. But as I think of it now, it was something like you'd see on television. It was quite a scrap. But he was a nice fellow. Like he just had too many drinks, but he liked to take a drink. So he was in the First World War. He went over in the First World War and he started a big rumpus. I was talking to the colonel in town one day, and he remembered him, and having an awful time with him. Decided he didn't want to go. They were pretty independent. You imagine now, they're on the troop ship and decided he didn't want to go, was going to leave before they pulled out. He had a Cape Brettoner there, and he got the Cape Brettoner to hit him and knock him out. When he woke up, it was too late. That was in the First World War. But anyway, I haven't answered any of your questions. I can give you some names of some people that, now there was a Bishop Clement Kelly up here in Elliotvale, like he'd be from Vernon River Parish, and he fought in the Spanish-American War. Like, I mean, he didn't fight, he was the chaplain, but he had a sword and everything. I suppose that'd be a dress sword. And he was in the Spanish-American War, like with Teddy Roosevelt, like he went down to the States. And I'm trying to think who could tell you about that. What about Dan O'Donnell, Elizabeth? He might. Or even Father Wood might have some information. Perhaps Father.
I tell you, Robert, David slipped to the door there. He says, if Daddy's giving them girls any names, don't forget Father Albert. He thinks Father
You think he may know a lot
Father
about
Albert knows everything about the Irish.
Oh, perhaps he does. He's in Fort Augustus. He'd be at the rectory in Fort Augustus, and Father Wood is down here. I don't know if Father Wood might have some information on that.
He'd have the information on that.
On Bishop Clement Kelly. But I do know, I saw his sword, and they had a display on in town one time, and they had some of his artifacts. And he was the chaplain, and he was the Spanish.
He would even perhaps have
If it wasn't the Spanish-American War, it was, that was in Cuba. That was in Cuba with Teddy Roosevelt.
Father Wood might have the facts written down.
Well, he could, and he might not. See,
oh, they likely would, Joe.
The history in Ireland, they had, every time they'd have an uprising, they'd head for the post office or somewhere, or some of the buildings, and then they'd get burnt down and blew up, and the records would be lost. Like, I'm the 5th generation. My boys, my children are the 6th generation of Dorans to live on the island. And every one of those generations has farmed, even if it was only for a short while. Most of them, like Edward Doran came here like in 1830, and he settled up in Morel, and I saw the deed in at the archives where he bought the land from the agent. His name was Warnell, and then his son was John. He'd be my great-grandfather. He was married to Mary Wallace. And his son was Edward, and his son was John. That's my father. I'm John, and I have a son, John David, and James Robert. So, like, Dad, like, when there was brothers, so Dad went up to the States, and he saved his money, and he came back here and bought this farm when I was 12. And then he gave it to me, like they didn't sell a farm, they gave it. And the first fellow's buried at St. Andrews, and my great-grandfather, he's buried in St. Lawrence's Church in Green Meadows or Morel Rear there. I went up one day and drove in, and it was the tombstone right there. It was funny to see, like John Doran, like it gives you a little bit of a start, like, you know, to see it. So, like, we've always been, like, as farming as our, that's what we, although, like, my grandfather, he was a brick mason, and he built those round wells with the stones all the way down, like you've seen the stone cellars, like with they take the field stones and they trim them and they put them up and then mortar around them and place them. But they did that with the wells, and the wells were round, down say 30 feet, 20 feet to the water. He did that. That was his trade. And but he farm too. But I like to farm. Like the Dorans, like that was they like to farm and they love the land. And Prince Edward Island was our Ireland. You see, like I may never get to Ireland. I'd like to go, but we think the same of it as they did of Ireland. And it's just in your blood, I guess. You know, we like good cattle. I have 700 acres of land. I started with, well, we still own, that's not counting, we still own one of the original pieces of land in Morel. The one that they had in 1830. I still have it up there. And it's on the atlas. But I hope my sons will farm. The oldest boy says he thinks he will. But I mean, you can't pressure them. Like, they're not very old yet, they're only kids. They go to Fort Augusta School. Like their other, on their mother's side, they're all buried over, like the same many generations there. They're all just in the graveyard across from the school. See? So, but we have to drive them part way. The other school bus from Vernon River goes right to the door. But it was, this was an open room school in Vernon River. And you know what I mean by an open room. And I didn't just like the sound. There used to be some hippies come here looking for to buy land and things. And they used to say, oh, you have a free school. That's what we went to. And it scared me a little, so I took the kids back here. There was more discipline. And they've done well. The youngest boy is on the baseball team, and this is his first year on it, and he's getting along good. I enjoy going to the games. And I used to play ball when I was his age, but it was in the States. I was confirmed by Archbishop Cushing, and I was at, I know I is the smallest word in the world, I was at Cardinal O'Connell's wake. Did you ever read the book, The Cardinal?
No.
Well, there is a book, and it was made into a motion picture. It was at the North River here, I suppose, 12 or 14 years ago. It's the story of his life, and it's quite a book. It's not a book like I mean, it's just quite a book. He's quite a guy, and not just your not just your everyday cardinal. And the Kennedys used to go to our church sometimes, John Kennedy and them. Like it was the Cathedral Church. It was the Cathedral of the Holy Cross. It was the main church in the diocese. It was like St. Dunstan's is here for Bishop Spence. And Mayor Curley, the fellow that wrote the book about the Last Hurrah, he used to go there. And in Boston, if you were Irish, you were someone, because everything was run by the Irish at that time. Now it's Puerto Rican people. Before that, it was black people. But when we were there, it was, if you were Irish, that was it. They ran the place. All the politics, that's how the Kennedys came up through. And I went to school with his cousin, what's the mother's name? The mother's side? Fitzgerald. Yeah. Her mother used to come for her, like we had when we left the school, like the school was to the north of the church, and then the church covered a long distance. And there was 3 different routes that the children went home. And you went out 2 by 2, just like an army sort of thing. And the nuns walked along every so far until they got you way down past the church, and then you went your own way. And she used to wait for her down there. They had, a big limousine of some kind. She used to talk to my mother. Mom never realized, that. But she was, quite alright. Her and Mom got along great. This girl's mother, but there was quite a difference in their incomes. So now, let me see what else I can think of.
What do the girls want?
Oh yeah, another chap that might be able to give you some information is Bill Redden. Anyway, he came down to a sale. There was a sale in Vernon River, and they had a harp that came from Ireland. And the church now was in charge of the sale. The people left the money to Mother Teresa. But that harp should have been put in the church. You see, that it was sold. Like Bill, I guess. As far as I know, I don't think he was able to get it. And it wasn't just it was a harp that came from
Ireland.
From Ireland, yeah.
Are there many things that came from Ireland that they brought with them?
Well, see, now, our people here, like, they had to go to the States, like, and then come back and buy this place and start. But there is some families that have things right from Ireland. And there is not a great deal now, because a lot of them, when they came here in the famine, they didn't have very much. But there was some families that, for one way or another, had more money or a better chance or came earlier. And there is things like,
Oh, yeah.
I saw a letter that Parnell wrote, one of the Irish patriots, and Connemara marble, and rosary beads made out of, I just forget now, from some kind of stone, but they were made like out of these little stones, like right from Ireland. And there was some people up on the Monaghan Road that burnt peat. We have peat in our woods back here, and there's a certain section in the woods, if you dug down, you could take it up dry. I guess there's perhaps some up west too.
Yeah.
Yeah. That stove will burn peat. You have to dry it, like it has to be dry. But in Ireland, they use it for their hydroelectricity. Their hydro. They must have a lot of it. Did you ever see Ireland?
No.
No, you didn't. No. My cousin went there, but he's in California, and he was in they were in the States, and he was in the American Air Force in Korea, and then he works on the airplanes. He's a mechanic or whatever he is. And it's funny, these other Doran people have a son, Edward, that I read in the paper was in California, I believe, with the American Air Force. And this other cousin of mine, his name is Edward too, and that's where he is. He got over to Ireland, but I didn't know he was going. But he just went there like without any background, or he just went over like to see the place. That's where my people came from, I think. And he went over to see it. Like I could have told them right where to go. Like they might have found the area right where they lived. You could even, some people have even found their, we'll call it ancestral home. You know, they've even been able to trace it down.
Where was it the Dorans were from?
Waterford.
Waterford.
Yeah.
That'd be in the southern part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and my mother's people were McGurks, and they were from Northern Ireland. Not quite Northern Ireland, on the border there. Yeah, County Monaghan. That's road out there. When you go straight through our road about a mile, you turn right, and that's the Monaghan Road. And that was all settled right up through to Fort Augustus. The Monaghan.
More things you can tell the girls about that area, like what do you call it? Little Hell.
Oh yeah, Drumore.
No,
Yeah.
Drumore.
Yeah.
How many firms there was on it,
Well,
and what it is today.
They're
Like
all
that should
gone.
be.
Yeah. But they moved. A lot of them moved down to Fort Augustus, like retired and moved.
Yeah, but
down
that's all right. But that district, you should be able to tell them about that, John. Like that's a whole district there, and you know.
Well, it was. They called it Little Hell because they
Drumore.
the
Drumore, the same as where they came from in Ireland.
Yeah, they named it after the place. There's a song, "The Castle of Drumore," and they named it. They named it after where they came from in Auburn too. They used to fight among themselves more for pastime, I think, than anything. The McGurks and the Hugheses, and they were all related, like, and then politics. Some would be liberals and some would be conservatives, and I think they did so much of that, and they made moonshine, like not to sell, but for their own parties and dances. Like they used to say, there was a fiddle in every house and a plow for every four. You see, and there was more partying lots of times than there was plowing. But they did get into the strawberry business, when would it be, 19, perhaps before 1940. And they did well on that for years and years there, because it was ideal land for strawberries. They got along. I remember one cousin of my mother's with $1,000 bill. That'd be back in 42. $1,000 bill. Like, it was a lot of money then. After all his expenses were paid and everything for that year.
17 kids.
No, that wasn't him. This was
That wasn't Henry?
No, he had 21 children. I had an uncle with 21 children, and 17 or 18 of them living. You see.
So they're all around. They're still around.
Yeah.
But this Demore now, it was all farms and all
It
houses.
was all Irish too.
And it was all Irish, and it's not at all right today. One Dutchman stuck in it.
Yeah, but
Well, it's history, dear. It's
yeah,
the
I know.
truth.
That's
You
why
know,
I'm
tell
saying.
the truth.
That's why I'm saying why they left. I just explained that. There was too many dances and parties, and they made the strawberries were good, but the young people wouldn't stay. They thought it was a shame that they didn't stay.
They're out to the pavement scene. There's nobody there now. Just Fraser and potatoes.
Yeah, well, the government bought a lot of it. That was a mistake.
Whole district's
People
gone.
got older, and the government said, "We'll give you a pension for your property." And that was something I know. I talked to one of them afterwards, and he wished he had never done it. And of course, some of them had no.
The last one was their cousin of his, a big rough woman. She was married to Kelly.
Yeah,
She's still there.
she's still there. Yeah.
But she can't manage. Her husband's dead, so she can't manage. But she didn't go.
She used to fight too.
She just tip up the bottle. Tip up the bottle.
I was
Yeah.
fishing. I was fishing in Drumore. I used to come every summer, say, to my uncle's, and he lived in Drumore, and I'd go down to the stream to fish. And you know, when you left Boston and you went to Drumore, it was. I don't think if I left here and went to heaven, it'd be any bigger, improvement. To get off the streets of Boston and go to Drumore, it was heaven. I lived the whole winter through, like till the next summer to get there. I was fishing down on this bridge, little wooden bridge, them days, and flocks of sheep around and horses with foals, and in fact, you're seeing some of that come back now. You go by fields now and you see a horse, a mare with a foal. But these two chaps came up from Charlottetown with a car, fancy gear and everything. And this Mary McGirt, she had red hair and she'd be about 200 pounds. And she was, I suppose, what would Mary be? 7 or 8 years older than me. She'd be 18 or 19 or 20 then. And she come along, she had this, you've seen the Shaggy DA? She had one of those dogs. They're an old English sheepdog, or there's perhaps you know more about them breeds of dog. But anyway, with the woolly face,
Yeah.
she'd taken them down to the washer to give them a bath in the stream. She come along just in time to hear these two fellas tell me to get lost so they could fly fish. And she walked over and shoved between the two of them and picked this big, it was a big, big dog, picked him up and dropped him right in, and the water just came back up over the bridge and soaked the two of them, and their lines got tangled, and she told them where they should go and how long they had to get there. Or they were going in where the dog went. And they packed up and got out of there as fast as they
Yeah,
could.
she's a bit of the roughness that's left.
But she was kind-hearted, but she was strong. She hauled out pulpwood one winter there were 6 fellows from Rustico. Now this wasn't with chainsaws. They were good woodsmen. And she hauled the horse and sleigh. She hauled all the wood out all winter, kept it away from them. She was strong. The husband came home one evening and he had got a bottle in town, and this Seymour Hughes drove him home, drove into the yard. And the last hill before they got there, he finished the bottle. And there he got out of the car and staggered around, and that she didn't mind it being full, but she minded that the bottle was empty. She hauled off and hit him and dropped him, just stretched him right up the yard. Seymour said when he got out the gate and turned up the road, he looked in, poor Kelly was still stretched out in the air.
You better give Seymour's, because he can tell them all about Drumore.
Yeah, if you want to know about that Irish settlement in Drumore, Seymour Hughes.
More Hughes?
Seymour Hughes.
Seymour Hughes.
Yeah. And how you'll find him is if you come out from town to Fort Augustus, like you go by the church, and you come up and there's a little store there, they call it Jean's Grocery.
Mm-hmm.
Turn right there, and he's, say, the third house on the right-hand side. And now, but if you get the wrong house, they'll tell you, because they're all related.
His daughter's next, and
Yeah.
they're all right there.
Yeah. And, I can't guarantee that these people will talk or...
Oh,
but
Seymour.
I think so. Yeah, he's a nice man. He might just tell them that you'd like to know about the Irish in Dromore?
Yeah.
That settlement. Like,
He would give you, like, he lived there. So
he lived there, and
he came out, like, he was one of the ones that came out.
yeah.
They were all on that road, really. They came out and bought homes, sold their farms, see?
Yeah, to the
They're right there in
government,
little houses there.
And there's out here on the Monaghan Road, like if you turn right at the gate, go out to the corner, it's about a mile. Turn right again and go up, cross the first railroad track, and it's the first place on the left, just as you cross the track. And their name, that's Raymond Wood, and they came with the Monaghan settlers, like their ancestors. They built a log cabin, and he has a daughter, Helen Flynn. She's married to a Flynn, and she's the nurse at Sleepy Hollow. And at one time, I think
She did a history.
she was going to. She either did a little history on them, or she was going to. And that would be the Irish in Lake Bird and up along the Monaghan Road, like. It wouldn't be Dromore, like, but see, it'd be the next settlement to them people. So they might have some. The first priest out here in Vernon River was from Ireland. He was Father Brady. The very first priest in that parish was Father Brady. And if you want to know anything about, if you need any information about the Catholic priests, like the Irish ones, a chap that would know is Brendan Kern, and he lives on the way to Montague.
They have to take that down.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to see what. You know where Rudish's garage is?
No, I've
Except
heard of it,
he's
but
the Datsun dealer. Like when you're on Road 3 going to Montague, it's right out on the side of the road. You'll see he probably has a few Datsuns left there.
I've probably seen it, yeah.
Yeah, so you just go by there and there's a lane to the left. It's paved. It goes in around in a circle, like on the opposite side, just a short and it makes a circle up, and it's the new house, and that's where Brendan Kern lives, and which is an Irish name, of course. And he's, I think now perhaps when you be talking to him, you wouldn't be, but I believe he knows quite a bit about the priests of the island, and but anyway, you might pick up something there. And again, Bill Redden but Bill was a lawyer, and he had a bit of a drinking problem, and he also was a professor at St. Dunstan's, and like he may quote Latin, and he can.
He's clever.
Yeah, he's a smart man. He perhaps go into that poem about Wallace and Bannockburn and all that, like, you know. But Bill should. He's got the house full of books, and he may want to keep his, but you tell him you'll be back. But he's.
Is he quite elderly, or?
How old would Bill be? 65, 70?
First thing you asked me about Fred, I think Fred told us he was 70.
Fred is 70. And his brother's a friend of ours, Fred Redden. I was talking to him on the phone this evening. Now, Fred is, he's 70. He lives down in Bunbury.
You ever tell him like he's 74?
No, he's younger than Fred. Fred.
Just a look younger.
They owned where Woolworths is and Moore and McLeod's. They owned their father owned that whole block one time.
Would that be would the Redden's drugstore that used to be along
I think they're connected. I think they're connected,
yeah.
Yeah, I
I
think
remember
so.
that from years ago.
That tall man, I think he was.
But I think they were connected to them, and but Bill didn't know that. When their father died, they sold those.
O'Mara.
Yeah, they were. Yeah, the mother was an O'Mara, and but Fred now last year decided to burn wood. See, he sold, and when you go in the Mason Road in Bunbury, where the old school was.
Must have met the sons at college. They never.
Did you know any like Bill's wife is that Estella Redden? She was her pictures in the paper the other day.
She's at the
Child died. The diets for teenagers or something. She was-
University, she's there, isn't she?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
She left Bill, saying. I remember Bill had 2 Newfoundland dogs one time. You know what Newfoundland dog looks like? Like long ago, like when the women had could be the head of the tribe or the clan, and the women had rights and everything. They can't stand to be henpecked, and most of the most of the like being a warrior race, don't let me hurt your feelings. Most of the women were more inclined to we'll say boss them, especially the older ones. Now you can't generalize, but to a certain extent you can when you're dealing with a race, like you know what I mean, like the German people, like there's a German mentality, and you know, to a point, and so they would in order to, instead of saying something right then, they go out like they're kind-hearted, huh? And they're easy hurt, like even though it don't look that way. He may be firing you out the door, but afterwards he'd hate to have done it to you, you see, and give you the coat off their back and then beat you up and take it away from you. In order then to go back and say something to the wife, they'd have to have this few drinks in, or to their mother. And even in Ireland, they don't marry very young, you see, because they think a lot of their mother, you see. And then the mothers are hard on them too. They always do this and do that, and overprotective, and of course doesn't want them to get married because this is their son, and they think a lot of their son. Huh? So it caused a lot of them to drink, and because they just didn't. When they had the few drinks in, then they could say what they, you know. But other than that, they didn't like to.
My mother was born in Scotland, but she spent a lot of her years in Ireland.
Or at the time that I went through there, it's quite a while ago, I noticed their farms and everything, like they had prospered much more than, say, the people in Iona or Fort Augustus, and yet they were all from County Monaghan, as far as I know. The same names and everything. And I just wondered what the reason for that was. Perhaps they had no fiddles, I don't know. Maybe they're all plows.
One fellow was telling us that that land was given, it was a Scottish lord that had that land, but he knew it was good land, he just wanted it settled. But the land in Kincora, that was sort of the exception to the rule as far as the Irish went, that it happened to be better land than the rest of it.
And that was given the advantage, yeah. That's back to what Elizabeth said about that.
Yeah.
Now when I started farming, like when my parents came here, 47 they bought this place, and there's good land on this place, and 75 acres. And then I went to school down here. I was in grade 8 when I came here. I had 7 years, and that's all the education I got. It was those 7 years in Boston, like with nuns at the school. And I shouldn't say that. I went to grade 8 down here, but the teacher was only a permanent teacher. There was a woman lived next door, Miss Vickerson. She was a teacher, and she tutored me. And then I took the grade 8 exams, and I passed them. I had hard exams at that time in grade 8. And then I went to grade 9, and I finished grade 9 again with just a permanent teacher, one-room school. But it was quite a difference to come from the big school in Boston to come to this one-room school. It was like Glengarry school days. You look out the window and there'd be a foxtrot across the field. Like there was no way you're going to keep your mind, you know. You hear the wild geese going over. You never heard wild geese going over.
Something he forgot to tell you. He came the third highest.
Yeah, I came the third highest on the island.
Because I came the third highest.
Heritage. The people would have the minister there, and the Catholic people would have the priest, and you know, just to look at them, that each one is saying, well, I'm glad Reverend so-and-so is there, this wouldn't be a marriage. And the other people, I'm glad Father's there, this wouldn't be going over at all. And like it doesn't make sense. So when you do break it down to races, and really what you're doing is you're just keeping the thing going. Like it'd be better if they all settled on one language. And I guess I don't know if they ever will or not. They say there'll be one flock and one shepherd, but they're going to have some doing to straighten it out. They may have to weed the flock though to death. Mills, and they had their sheep, and they carded the wool and spin the wool, and they ground their flour. They were pretty self-sufficient, and it's just the bright lights and stuff. They thought they would go to Boston. There was gold in the streets. Dad went up to Boston when he was 19, and he remembered going to work early in the morning, like it'd be fairly bright. There was a skunk run across the street, That was the friendliest thing he had seen since he had got to Boston, because he remembered the skunks, and it reminded him of the island. You know, nothing was very friendly. It was hard to get started there. And then he was a machinist. He worked for a big factory, but he just wanted to get back to the island. And, but I'm glad he did, because I wouldn't want to live anywhere else. But I would like to see Ireland. There's Michael Doran. He's a captain in the Northern Army in the American Civil War.
I was going to say the name sounded familiar. Probably had it in American history. I told it.
Yeah. So someone was telling me that you could get in touch with them, and they could find out for sure. That the Army keeps all its records right back. I was an American citizen, but when I came here, I became a Canadian, because I was only back once. I never went back to Boston. I was back as far as Maine. What do you girls do?
Universities.
Quite a few good farmers on the island that are Irish, but there's a lot of them that weren't. If you're driving up the road, when you come to Ray Woods, if you go on a little further there, as you're driving along, you'll see the little places, and there's not many on the farm now, but they had a certain way of doing it, and like they wouldn't have any mortgage, like they were afraid of that, like it's still handed down from all the years that they were oppressed, and that they had to, they were taught in the hedgerows in Ireland, and the English figured if they took away their weapons and their education and their religion and everything, and like it was like almost like a form of genocide or something, and it affected a lot of them. Like it carried right down through, and they never overcame it. It was something like that. It's like the American Negro, you see. Sure, we see Negroes or black people that like to be called now. That when I was there, they liked to be called Negroes. They mightn't like it now. It's black people now, I think. But anyway, you see them on comedians, astronauts, you name it. I mean, they can do anything anyone else can do. But there's an awful lot of ghettos and everything, and they never got a chance, because they were kept down from slavery, just there's I don't know, it's an inherited fear or what it is, and these people had it too. Like you couldn't hurt them, you couldn't touch them, but even to keeping their places up too well, because the tax man then might take it. And yet they were happy, and they had plenty to eat and all that. But it'd be, in the old days, it'd be like when the smelts would come in. Like my grandfather would go on my mother's side, he'd go to the Pisgah River, and it was the Micmac Indians that named it that. And he'd go there early in the morning, because it was against the law, of course. And they'd take a whole wagon load of smelts home, and this would be fed to the hens, the pigs. It would be planted in with potatoes. There was no end to what they could use it for. Like it was protein. We had fish meal and soybean meal and everything. They didn't have that. And that was the first thing in the spring. It was almost like a blessing. And of course they had them themselves too to eat. Hens wouldn't lay then in the wintertime. And around Easter, if Easter was late, the hens would have started laying. They'd get out around in the sun and everything. And they really appreciated the eggs then. But the hens wouldn't lay in the wintertime. Those months there was no light, there was no protein. They just survived. All the bull calves were killed. There was no fertilizer. They hauled the muscle mud. And you notice a man's still hauling muscle mud. You probably know about him. Unfortunately, his son died the other day. One of his sons, he has a big family. Andrew Mernion is his name. The son had the leg off from the cancer. Yeah, Freddie Mernion. But he was on the ice this winter. I think he's done it for 30 years or something, haul muscle mud. But see, there's a strange thing there now. Like here's a son that died with cancer, and they're living on a farm. I guess perhaps up until quite recently they probably had a lot of their own food. The land has the muscle on it. Sir Andrew MacPhail, do you know what I mean? He wrote that the people on the island, the reason they lived so long and were so healthy, and there was a generation there that did, like before us, fellow down the road plowing when he was 90. Like my grandfather was, Dad's father was sat at the kitchen table there when he's 94. And his sister died only here 2 or 3 years ago, and she was 96. And anyway, he said it was there's a theory that like the people came from the sea, that, you know, and which I don't agree with, but then there's a lot you don't know about. But anyway, the mussel mud and taken from the sea and put on the land, and then their gardens were grown and their potatoes, and they ate this food, and he credited this for their good health and their long life. But now here's a place that is still doing this. Like they're trying to link cancer with the food, and I think that's like you know, the nitrates and things like that. It may be, but I think it's an awful lot of chemicals and stuff they're spraying around. But that you know, I just wondered, like, now there was a place that was still, and it didn't do any good for that fellow, unless you know, the junk food bit, like he was only 19, you know, could be something there. You'll perhaps never know those things. But he's still hauling, they all haul the mussel mud then, and they'll analyze it, and they just say there's calcium in it, like, but there was more than that. Like we feed our calves with nipple bottles. It's just a bottle, you put the milk in, it's got a nipple on it, and the calf has 4 stomachs, and the milk goes into the right stomach. If it goes into the wrong stomach, the milk, the one that they when they get older, when they eat grass, if it goes into the wrong stomach, it'll sour there, and the calf will get sick. But with the nipple bottle, it's just like when he's with his mother. The Japanese made a big study, and they found that there was no difference to feeding them out of a bucket on the floor or up high or a nipple bottle. But it isn't so. See, there's something there that's not, you can't really explain. There's a lot of those things.
I wonder, when you say that about the farming, John, over in that area, they never really progressed. Actually, only a few of them passed the horse stage.
That's right,
like
yeah.
They stopped there because perhaps they weren't brave enough to.
Well, they didn't want to lose
And
what they had.
they went to the city and made their. Well, then it was $10 a day when they started, when they left their farms.
They took up the hammer.
They knew it was sure, see, and they didn't want to brave the mortgage to go into the deep farming.
And then there's another thing too. Another thing is your jealousy. Now, say there's 20 farmers, and one guy goes in town and starts on construction work, and all of a sudden he's got a car and he goes on a vacation. The other guys are still farming away, no vacation, and perhaps just a lot poorer vehicle. Next year there's 5 or 6 in there on the construction work with them. There's gold in them streets, and away goes your agricultural community. See, it's gone. Because and then if the construction work goes sour, the farm is either sold or grown up in alders, and that's it. So that affected them too, like, because they didn't. You know, you have to be content, like, and you have to balance some things that you can't have with some things that you can't buy. Like like they've talked the farmers into that farming is a business. It's not a way of life anymore. But there was a chap on the other day, John Ewart on FM. He said he sold his farm and he misses it. Went to work with a farmer this spring, like just part-time, just for the enjoyment of it, but it wasn't the same because he didn't own it. It wasn't his. And, we were cleaning up an area today where some trees had fell down, and I fenced it for some, but we raise a lot of our own food.